This is Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Corombos, honored to be joined today by Bill Van Scoyoc, who is not a veteran of the United States military, but he's here to tell us about a very special one named Rick Rescorla. He's also here to tell us about his role in the harrowing events of 9/11 inside the World Trade Center. And thanks very much for being with us.
Hey, Greg, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. And honestly, I'm just so appreciative of the fact that we get to speak of Rick and his heroism and what he did on 9/11.
Where were you born and raised?
So I was born and raised in Yonkers, New York, Westchester County, and Yonkers is about 20 minutes outside of Manhattan. And as you can probably tell by my accent, I am an absolute New Yorker through and through, even though I live in Florida now for the last 9 years, which is basically just southern New York. So but it's great. I'm very proud of my heritage, where I come from. And nothing to me was more spectacular than working in New York City, for the years that I did. And in particular, working in the Trade Center, which to me was the penny ultimate of my career from an experience standpoint. Just a wonderful place to be. And very proud of the firm that I work for and the presence that we had in that building.
Where'd you go to school?
Well, I went to high school at Iona Preparatory High School. And then I went to a community college, Westchester Community College, and had a great time there and loved playing baseball for Westchester Community College. And just a wonderful experience. And, kind of ended up in this career really as I don't even know how I ended up in this career. I was actually all set to become a police officer, and this kind of fell in my lap because a very good friend had mentioned to me that, I should take a look at it because it's something that he thinks I'd do really well in. Kind of started it and got involved with it, and just really like where I work for and who I work with, and things have just been fantastic 24 years later.
That takes us back to 1995.
Yes.
And did you work at the Trade Center right away?
No, actually, I started in White Plains, New York, and I didn't actually start at the Trade Center officially until, ironically, September 11th of 2000. That was my first day. And I was asked to go into a management training program, and our responsibilities were when folks went to go to work for Morgan Stanley, they in the broker training position, they were kind of, after they passed their examinations, sent to New York City for a 3-week training program, which was coordinated out of to World Trade Center. And my job, or one of my responsibilities, was to work with colleagues to help coordinate that program, which was a 3-week program. And just it was a wonderful, wonderful experience for everyone. They got to see the culture of the firm. And they also got to learn, some of what you need to be, or hopefully what you need to be successful in this business.
How many employees did Morgan Stanley have at the Trade Center?
Well, my memory was Morgan Stanley was the single largest tenant in that location, with a presence in multiple buildings in the Trade Center. And I believe we had somewhere in the vicinity of about 3,300 to 3,400 employees in total.
How did you meet Rick Rescorla?
Well, interestingly enough, Rick's personality, and Rick's presence were always known, even for somebody new coming to the location. I remember just the initial fire drills and some of the preparatory events that they would have in the Trade Center. The Trade Center was a great location, and it was one of the most amazing places I've ever sat foot in my life, and it was just unbelievable. And we would have safety and fire drills on a regular basis, and Rick would coordinate and run those drills. And I didn't know who Rick was, honestly, when I first knew him, but his presence and his demeanor certainly defined him when I first met him. And I could just tell, I could sense his passion for making sure that everyone was secure and that he was protecting everyone in that building.
You mentioned his demeanor. What was it like on a regular day?
He was great. Rick was definitely, and again, I didn't find out until after the fact, but Rick was a soldier. He was somebody that was inspiring, somebody that you would see that you would want to look up to, and somebody who was a true leader, and someone that you had confidence in, that would do the right thing at the right time. So only after the fact did I even find out of his valor and his courage in Vietnam and what he did. And funny, for a guy just coming there working in a building, I never had more confidence and felt more secure, working with someone than I did with Rick. I just thought he was fantastic.
You talked a little bit about how he approached his job, with his mission to protect everyone. How did that manifest itself in how he interacted with you and everybody else there?
Well, what I think was great about Rick is, there was an open line of communication for where we worked. I mean, obviously we were in an incredibly high profile building, and folks would always talk about, the bombing incident that happened back in the early 90s. And that story was so prevalent and told so many different times that it almost became self-educational, for what you needed to do to hopefully not ever encounter, a similar situation such as that. But I think Rick did an unbelievable job of instilling in people the fact that you need to be quick, you need to be decisive, you need to listen, and you need to leave that building. And that's exactly what he instilled, because all I can think about is my own part in what happened. And the decision was almost instantaneous. It was from all of the training. I remember people said it took 2 hours to get down the stairwell, during the bombing. And I remember saying, man, I don't want to be in this location for 2 hours. If something, really bad is going to happen, and I certainly don't want to have anybody that I'm responsible for put in jeopardy for that period of time. So when the events happened, we made the decision just incredibly quickly to evacuate that building. And I credit a lot of that to Rick. I really truly believe, just in the short period of time that I worked with him and the training that he gave us, that he played a big role in not only saving my life, but so many other people.
Now, you mentioned there's 3,300 people in different buildings in the World Trade Center complex. So in the building you were in, where were most of them concentrated? What floors of the building, or was it all over the place?
So my responsibility and where I worked with a great group of people on the 61st floor of Tower 2. And that particular day, we were on the second day of a 3-week training program where we had, of course, ironically, the largest training class we've ever had of 276 people that really came in from all across the country. And these folks were here on their second day of their first week of a 3-week training program in New York City. And as a native New Yorker, I can tell you wholeheartedly, New York it's the greatest place in the world. But you know what? If you're not accustomed to it, it can be a pretty intimidating place. These people were just trying to get used to, and accommodated to being in New York City, which, for a lot of them was just an overwhelming experience to begin with. And certainly, and of course, no one would have ever anticipated what was to happen moving forward.
How did you learn about the first plane hitting Tower 1, and what was the reaction?
Well, what I remember from that night, or day, I should say, is, walking in and going to my job and being there at 7 a.m. and getting things prepared. And fortunately, the first speaker that we had that day actually showed up 15 minutes early, which you don't think about certain things until they matter. And I thought that was fantastic, getting him on early, having him speak, and kind of getting the class ready and have everybody be attentive for that time. And when he finished speaking about 15 minutes early. And ironically, he never realized how important that time would be, because what I did is put everybody on break, for an extended period of time, and told them, hey, you can go and go downstairs and relax, go to the cafeteria, get yourself coffee, and you got a half hour now instead of 15 minutes on a break, which is great. But literally, maybe about 5 or 10 minutes after he had finished speaking, someone came running up to me and they said, there's some structural damage in one of the offices. And I said, what do you mean? And I actually walked back there and I saw a crack in the glass of one of the rooms that we used to house all the people that we had. And I knew something was wrong because it just didn't seem right. And I remember looking out the window and, as a big New York Yankee fan, I remember when the Yankees beat the Mets in 2000, we had a ticker tape parade down there, and it was great. And there was all these wonderful things flying outside because people were celebrating. This was kind of like a more horrific version of that. There was debris, there was things that were on fire, and there were just, you knew something was wrong. So my first instinct was go back into the center room, try to get my hands around all of the folks that were still up there, try to organize it and wait for instruction. And that's exactly what we did.
After the second plane hit Tower 2, the building management was still telling people not to leave the building, right?
Well, I remember this vividly. We decided, because of security and the folks kind of instructing us and saying, might not be a bad idea to leave the building. I remember making the decision, because it was my class, that let's leave. I just thought it was a prudent decision, thought it was the right thing to do. And we can always come back into the building. But again, after all the stories and all the education that Rick gave us and the team put in our heads, you can't always leave the building. It can take time to get downstairs. And I certainly don't want to see anybody jeopardized or any lives put in danger. So we actually evacuated, went down the stairwell, and got to about the 50th floor. And the 50th floor was a re-entry floor. And right before we got to the 50th floor, it actually had come across the intercom system that, building 1 was hit by an aircraft, building 2 is secure. Go back to your desks. And I remember I had a small group of people with me, and they actually said, well, what do you think we should do? I said, oh, well, I'm just thinking we should just leave. Because, you know what, I mean, I don't know what's going on in the other building. And if there's a fire, smoke can certainly be dangerous and not something that we want to encounter. And let's just go downstairs and we'll regroup and we'll figure it out. And I would say literally within 2 or 3 minutes of that decision, then we got hit. And
what floor did the plane hit in your building?
It was above us. I think it was somewhere probably in the low 90s or high 80s. And all I can tell you is we felt the impact of the building. If you worked in the World Trade Center, that building was so tall and it was such an incredible structure that it would actually sway with the wind. So, sometimes you'd be in there and you'd actually feel like you were moving in the building, which was great. It was just such a structural marvel. And it was just an incredible place to be. But when we got impacted by the plane, it literally felt like we were on a pendulum, just swinging back and forth. And actually, I felt like I was going to fall out of the building. And what amazed me was just how incredibly well composed the folks were as we evacuated the building. And all I could think about that day was, I usually talk to my mom early in the morning, all times before I went to work. She'd always call me. And that particular day, I was just so busy, I didn't get a chance to do it. And I was just kind of regretful I didn't have a conversation with her, because I didn't know if I was going to get out of there or not. But all I could tell you was that folks were just incredible and amazingly focused. And just everybody was pitching in to help everybody else just get out of the building.
Were you in contact with Rick at any point during the morning?
No, I mean, just the security team that Rick was in charge of and entrusted to. And I remember coming down when we finally got down the stairwell, there was the observatory deck, which I believe was on the 8th floor. And I was actually with a senior member of management from Morgan Stanley who was helping me get some of the folks moved downstairs. And I can remember as we went down the escalator from the 8th floor, I could hear Rick, because Rick had a voice you never forget. With his accent and just his authoritative demeanor, which was, again, as a soldier, as somebody to respect as a leader, you certainly make note of when you hear it. And I could hear him instructing us, to come down and to exit the building. And I didn't actually see him run up the stairs, but I heard the stories of him coaching and helping and singing and doing anything he could to help people feel better for the chaos that was ensuing us, and trying to relieve and soothe us, but also trying to do what Rick did best, which was protect and get people out of the building.
You mentioned that folks had said it took 2 hours to get downstairs back in the 93 bombing. How long did it take you and the folks you were responsible for to get down there that day?
Amazingly fast. I never walked down 61 flights of stairs faster. And actually at one point, I was carrying a couple people with me that were having a hard time getting down 61 flights of stairs. The old story I like to tell is, I was probably about 30 pounds lighter back then and probably in the shape of my life. And it actually was helpful because it allowed me to help some other folks that maybe weren't quite as physically adept in walking down 61 flights of stairs to get down there. And I'd say we got down the stairwell and out of the building in probably less than 12 minutes.
12 minutes. So then did you find the people you had sent downstairs earlier? Did you reconvene with them somewhere, outside or inside? Or
Well, I mean, when
everybody
we went,
just kind of scattered at that point?
well, when we were outside, I remember I had a group of people with me and someone else from Morgan Stanley senior management. And quite frankly, we didn't know what to do and what was going on. But I remember going up to a police officer that was there, and I said, I've got some folks I'm responsible for. What do I do? And he said, honestly, he goes, get out of downtown. He goes, because we heard there's another plane coming. And at that point I said, all right, you know what? We would house all of the folks that would come in for this 3-week training program in 3 different locations. There was a wonderful hotel called the South Gate right across from Madison Square Garden, the East Gate, which was located right near there, and the Hotel Surrey. So I just basically said to the folks I was with, just go back to the South Gate. I'll get my way up there eventually, and we'll begin to try to piece this together. And I remember making that walk from downtown Manhattan to the South Gate Hotel, and I was desperately trying to call my mom and my dad because my dad, who's a former World War II veteran and unfortunately was incapacitated back then in a wheelchair. My parents were elderly, and I just wanted to make sure that they knew that I was okay. But there was just no cell phone service at all. And I think I found one payphone where there wasn't a line of 20 people on, and I was able to call my parents and let them know. And they asked me, they really requested that I come home, just walk back to Yonkers. It was a little bit of a long walk. But I said, look, I've got responsibility here. I said, I've got people that I'm responsible for that are going to need my help. And I don't know, quite frankly, what I can do for them, but just to have somebody there that can help them, I thought would be the right thing to do.
So what did you do with them?
Well, I went and walked back to the Southgate Hotel, and all I can tell you is the people and the staff at the Southgate Hotel were so amazing in helping me. I identified myself. I told them who I was, and I said, I have no lists. I have nothing that's going to be able to be a roster for accountability for the folks that we had. And they set me up in the back of the hotel and really in my own command center and provided me every resource I needed to try to piece this together and try to see out of the 276 people we had who we had and who was in the hotel and how we can find people that weren't and really just account for everybody. And it was a long, long process. And, we actually figured out a system where we had the other 2 hotels fax in the registry for people that had checked in. And I had actually spoken to the people that had checked in, went out to the streets of Manhattan at one point, walked around. And it was amazing after only a day and a half how many people I recognized from the class. And I think a lot of folks were in shock, as you can imagine, and just trying to get them back into the hotel and try to help them and make sure that their well-being was taken care of.
Where were you when the tower came down?
This was when I was walking from downtown New York. And interestingly enough, I had walked east, and I think I was somewhere probably around Canal Street or I remember being near J&R Music World, which was a place that I knew very well, an electronics store. And I just felt this rumble. And it was like nothing else I ever felt. I thought it was an earthquake. And I remember running under an awning and looking and just seeing what looked like a house of cards just come down and see this giant billowing smoke coming out. I remember at that point, I thought to myself, I can't believe what I just saw. The folks and the people that were in there were the only thing at the forefront of my mind. And it was devastating.
Did you head back to the hotel then? How did you respond in terms of making decisions after that?
I just decided to go back to the hotel and do everything I could. Whatever help I could provide and whatever I could do to help. That's what I wanted to do. Look, I always think about 9/11, and I always say you saw the best in people and the worst in people on the same day, which is something that you don't frequently see. But I can't really look back on it with any positive memories except for one thing. People lost their families, they lost their husbands, their wives, children. It'll never be a positive experience for me. But the inspiration of seeing people bond and work together, the greatest thing I've ever seen. And people truly wanted to help each other that day. And people truly wanted to work together. And together we all overcame something we never thought we'd have to experience. But we worked together through it.
What are some examples of what you saw? People who perhaps didn't even really know each other because they were all coming together for this training session. How did they work together? You talked about how you were pretty much carrying two people down the stairs.
Well, what I'll always remember, when we were in the Southgate Hotel, probably about an hour and a half after everything happened, someone had come up to me and said, you probably should address or have a meeting with the people that are here. And again, by no means was I an expert in dealing with situations such as this, so I was kind of piecing it together myself. But they said they need to hear from somebody in leadership or management here, some type of reassurance that there's going to be support and help for them, and really addressing them on what's going on. So I had a meeting, and I remember saying to myself, a lot of folks left their a lot of the ladies left their pocketbooks, and gentlemen left their jackets with their wallets in it. And there were people in need of money, and they needed some help and support. So I actually passed the cardboard box around the meeting room, and I said, look, we'll get this straightened out, and the firm will come in and support us. I know that for a fact because it's just a great place to be. I said, but in the interim, people need food and, just need some help. And I passed around a cardboard box. And I would say within less than 5 minutes, I had $3,600 in there. And I remember looking at that, saying to myself, that reaffirms my faith in humanity. Because, again, as I stated, people cared more about other folks than they cared about themselves. And they wanted to help and donate any way they can. I remember having a meeting and, again, not knowing what to say. But all I did was say that I'm going to give you the best effort I have to work this through. And I know this great firm that we work for will certainly support us and help us. And I'm going to get you home and back to your families. I don't know how yet, but I'm going to. Just give it some time. Have some faith.
And that got a little complicated since they grounded all the flights.
Well, it certainly wasn't easy. What I remember vividly was we had actually begun to get a little bit of a sense of normalcy within the first, let's say, day or so. And, for me, I just wanted to make people feel good. So I remember taking them to we had a restaurant, lounge, bar in the Southgate Hotel where I just told everybody to come and just meet. And we had a whole huge group of people, and it was great. And I really felt like, we're getting people in a better place. This has been an incredibly traumatizing event, but we're getting people in a better place. And, lo and behold, we had the bomb scare at the Empire State Building. And that was kind of difficult because after that, parents were driving up from all over the country to come and pick their children up. They just did not want to wait for us to get them back. And I actually really felt that, oh boy, I think we kind of had it under control, but it went a little chaotic after that event.
Now, you mentioned as you were exiting Tower 2, you could hear Rick Rescorla encouraging folks, singing to them. And obviously, you cleared the tower by a number of minutes before it came down. Why didn't Rick ultimately get out in time? I understand he went back up. What do you know about the sequence of events there?
I read about Rick after everything happened. And what's so inspiring about him was not only his actions that day, but his actions prior to that day in Vietnam. And Rick had always been asked, did you ever see the movie We Were Soldiers? And did you ever see? And at least from what I read, I don't think he did. And Rick's opinion was always, you know what? the heroes aren't the folks that are still here. The heroes are the folks that are no longer here. And again, just in my interactions with him, that's exactly how he came off, which to me meant he would rather sacrifice himself to save someone rather than provide for his own security. And you just knew he was going to get people out of that building, as many as he could, and his own safety and his own thought of himself. It was not the number one priority for him.
How did your company respond? You mentioned you knew that they would take care of the people who had left their wallets and so forth, but their offices were gone for thousands of people. So how did the company recover from that?
After 24 years of working for this firm, it's not even a company I work for. It's part of my life. And what they did to help people and to make this unbelievable, horrible event even somewhat palatable to people was extraordinary to me. You know, Morgan Stanley actually set up business contingency areas for folks to work out of. And Morgan Stanley helped and provided counseling and services to people that were affected by what we saw. And Morgan Stanley never forgets the events of that day. And, you know, look, with all the folks we still had 12 people that didn't make it out of that building that were part of our family. And every year we honor them. And every year we talk about Rick. And every year we provide whatever support we need for people to help them. Because 18 years later, I can only tell you it's a part of my life. It'll be a part of my life. And it'll be something that will always be in my memory. And I'm grateful for the firm I work with because of what they did from a support standpoint, the help they gave people, the continued support that they give them. I think it speaks volumes about this firm.
You mentioned 12 people didn't make it out, Rick being one of them. If Rick hadn't worked for you, hadn't been there, hadn't been helping people out, it's impossible to know how many more would have lost their lives. But the fact that out of 3,300, the toll wasn't higher, how much credit does Rick deserve for that?
An unbelievably enormous amount of credit. Again, for someone that only worked in the building for a year, I really felt that I was trained to make the right decision. And I give 100% of the credit to Rick and his team. And to me, I can't even fathom how many lives could have been lost. Bad enough the lives that we did lose, but I can't even fathom the lives we could have lost if we didn't have someone like him, who not only was a hero, but a leader, and an incredible one.
Like you said, we're talking here in 2019. It's been 18 years, and obviously the first few anniversaries of 9/11 got wall-to-wall media coverage and attention, and unless it's a 10 or a 15, it doesn't seem to get as much now. I assume that's not the case with you and Morgan Stanley. So when that day comes around, and it seems like it's almost inevitable that it's a crisp day with not a cloud in the sky, just like it was that day, what goes through your mind first?
Think about 9/10 and being with my family and being with my friends and going to a Yankee Red Sox game that never happened because it got rained out, and then hanging out with my friends watching the Giant Bronco game the night before, getting home early in the evening, getting ready for the next day, couldn't wait, and just so excited about my job and what I did with folks. And I remember walking across the street because I lived in Battery Park City at that time, and it was a beautiful day. It was a perfect day. And I remember thinking, like, man, this is going to be a good day we're going to get so many things done. It's going to be just great. And, obviously we didn't know what was going to happen. But, the memories, the folks that didn't get out of the building, the lives that were irreparably changed, they're always going to be a part of it. But the inspiration that I found that day, seeing people work together and uniting, is really what I try to put at the forefront of my mind for that day. Evil didn't win that day. Good did. And it came at a very, very, very costly price. But it prevailed.
Last question. You said earlier that you live in Florida now. We're talking here in Washington. And the reason you're here is because Rick Rescorla is being honored this week at the American Veterans Center Conference. What does it mean to you that he is being honored and that you are part of the opportunity to honor him?
I couldn't be more honored to be with the people I'm going to be with. As the proud son of a World War II veteran, as the proud nephew of an uncle who I never met, who also unfortunately died in World War II. There's an American Legion post named after him. To have a whole family that was so focused and centered in the military, nothing to me is of greater value than to be surrounded by the people that I really feel are the true heroes. And someone like Rick, to me, is a hero with no limitations for how you think of him, for what he did, the lives he saved, and everything that he accomplished. To be associated in any way, shape, or form, to keep his memory alive, and to see him get the recognition that he deserves, to me it's priceless. And if I could have a conversation with him today, I would just say thank you. Because I've got a great family, great kids, and I couldn't be happier in my life. And I think he had a big part in helping to make sure that I experienced that. And for him, it came at the ultimate cost. I can't make that up to him. But I certainly would love to see him honored and have his memory be in the front of everybody's mind.
Billy, I know that you've been very humble in talking about how the other people worked well together and the heroism of Rick that day, but I'm pretty sure those 276 people are really grateful for your leadership that day as well. And so thank you for that, and thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Bill Van Scoyoc is with Morgan Stanley, and as was a former colleague of Rick Rescorla, who is being honored at the 2019 American Veterans Center Conference. I'm Greg Corombos. This is Veterans Chronicles.